Hi, I'm Julieann Hartman, and welcome to The Journey. I'm so excited that you're here joining me today because I designed the show for you, for someone that is searching and looking for healing. Today's guest is Nichole Marbach, and this testimony is going to blow you away. And the one reason why I really love having this interview with this lady is because her testimony is a lot like mine as far as her childhood goes. There was a lot of abuse in her childhood as well as mine. And unfortunately, when something like that happens, sometimes we get sick and our hearts get sick. And that's what happened to me in 2008. I actually was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and many other conditions. And as much as I questioned and I doubted and I was really tempted to give up, I saw the working power of God in my life that walked me through this journey. So I'm so excited to bring to you today my friend Nichole Marbach. Welcome, Nichole.
Welcome, Nichole. I'm so glad that you're here today on the journey. It's just amazing to hear your testimony, and people are going to be so blessed by this because what I love doing with the journey is we get to get into the details of the story that you may not necessarily get into in your teachings and your conferences because there's always such limited time. So I really want to get into some detail, but before we start, give us a little bit of a background on what your life was like growing up as a kid, because you were healed of bipolar disorder, PTSD, self-harms, all those horrible things. Yeah. And so I just want people to really, let's start from the beginning of, how you were raised.
Thank you so much, Julieann, for having me on here. It's an honor to share my story and what Jesus has done in my life. So, like many people, my life started out with, unfortunately, a lot of trauma. My parents got married and they really didn't love each other, but the only reason they got married is because my mom was pregnant with me. And so that had a lot of strife and arguing in the home. And my dad actually turned to drugs and alcohol and was heavily involved in drugs and alcohol and high all the time and drunk. And so they used to have parties in the home, and I used to fall asleep under my mom's chair. I don't know how late. I mean, I was probably under her chair at like 1 a.m., but this was a regular occurrence. And so my parents, it came to the point where they decided to divorce each other. And my mom actually gave custody of me and they had my younger sister 2.5 years later to my dad. And basically she said, I want the car, you can have the kids in the house. So basically she slipped a note during the hearing with the judge and said to my dad, you can have the kids in the house, I want the car, because the guy she was having an affair with didn't like kids. And so my dad, he had custody of 2 little girls years ago. I mean, that didn't happen. But eventually they decided on joint custody. And I just remember, there were times my mom didn't show up for the visits. And then my dad brought a woman into the picture that was 19 years younger than him that didn't want kids. And my mom ended up getting remarried to somebody. So basically I went back and forth to both homes. And my stepmother could not stand me. My father sexually abused me and my sister. And also he was very, very verbally abusive and we were scared to death of him, basically. And then my stepfather was also physically abusive and very, very verbally abusive, especially to me. And so it did not matter which home I was in. I did not feel safe. So that was my norm growing up, was fear, chaos, turmoil. When people are sexually abused as children, it really takes a toll on them. I mean, people, especially if it is a parent that is supposed to care for you. And so when that happened, there were a lot of things that I believed about myself. I started receiving lies that there was something wrong with me. I was defective. I was unlovable. It was my fault. just all kinds of lies that come in. So along with that chaos and turmoil and fear and anxiety, I mean, honestly, as a child, I just felt like I wanted to die all the time.
You know, Nicole, let me ask you about that. When you said that those thoughts come in, where did they come from? Because you were very young, right? When all this started happening. Was it other people telling you that? Was just assumptions on your part? Like, you know, we know that that kind of stuff is from the devil, and he'll work through people that will allow him to. So was that coming from other people?
Right. Right. And I can't say that I just know with the way that I acted out. You know, when I was on the playground as a child, I was an angry child. So I acted out in anger because I didn't know what to do. So people would reject me. Nobody wanted to be with me. And I just felt like nobody liked me, you know? So it was both, you know. My dad said some things, and also, but it was a lot of just discerning what was going on in the situation and picking that up, that, oh, I must not be valuable, you know, and just so many things that came in with the abuse. And then nobody tells you as a child, or at least in my household, how do you deal with thoughts? How do you deal with negative emotions? So I stuffed it all in and started self-injuring actually as a child.
So God, this is so interesting how everybody is so different, you know?
Yeah.
For instance, I was also that way. I didn't self-harm. You know what I mean? Like you know, that's why our DNA is so different from each other.
Yeah.
But so your dad, of course, you know, this is so horrible because you had no one to go to. You know, your mom and your dad were both feeding you all of this negativity and just these lies and all this destruction. I mean, I did have my mom. And so my mom would balance things out for me. Although she couldn't stop some of the stuff going on, but at least I had someone to look at that was like, this isn't right. So what does a kid do when did you go to a teacher, a friend's mom? Like, did you talk to anybody?
I did not share any of this. Even when I started having close girlfriends in high school, and I'm actually still friends with some of them today, they did not know my story until it came out years later. But I will tell you that when I went to school, I bonded with some of the female teachers, and they kind of became like a mother figure to me. But I didn't share anything that was going on at home because I just couldn't. I did not want to get in trouble because I knew that if I did, who knows what would have happened to me. So instead, I just kind of soaked up the love. One of my teenage friends, I think I was about 12, I spent the night at her house, and the mom, I think, could sense that there was some stuff going on with me. And she's the one that actually spoke life to me and said to me, you know, I just want you to know that you are beautiful. And when she told me that, I was like, what? Are you talking to me? And that sparked something in me, like she spoke life into me when I needed it. So God provided in different ways people that spoke life to me when I didn't get it at home, because he's so good.
Now, question, was there any evidence of God in your family? Meaning, did you guys still go to church even though there was abuse? Because a lot of
well, here's the deal.
Shoved under the rug.
So it's amazing how God works all things together for the good, Romans 8:28. And I like to add humor, but my verbally and physically abusive stepfather actually led us to Christ. And I remember that moment. I was like 10 years old, and I was crying because I was so touched, because Holy Spirit came to live on the inside of me, but I had no clue what that meant. But he was very legalistic. And so in church, he was a different guy than he was at home. And so that legalism was just so also very difficult to live with.
Well, and it would, my gosh, because, what was being spoken in the home was just complete opposite of what was going on at the church. And that's where so
Yeah.
many kids and so many pastors' kids just completely rebel and run as far away as they can from their parents.
Yeah.
Because of that very thing. So now tell me,
Yeah.
now the sexual abuse, was this like an everyday thing? Was it once a month? I mean, where was the stepmother? Where was anybody? Was your sister involved with you at the same time? Like, what was going on with that?
Well, when my stepmother came into the picture, a lot of it ended except for the touching inappropriately. So we were very young at the time when that happened. And so when she came into the picture, it was almost like, in a way, I think it protected us from a lot. But it was not all the time. We were also at my mom's house, so it didn't happen all the time. But when we were with him, he was high all the time, and it's just, there's so much I could say. It wasn't just me. Also, my mom had a child before me, my sister Cheryl, and she was also abused by my father, and she was older at the time. So
Was that her father?
no, her father was actually very, very, very abusive. And so she didn't live with him, and she ended up, running away all the time. And she just went through a really rough time as well with some things in her life.
I'll tell you, praise God, because of where you are today and where you could be. You could be repeating that same history over and over. And that is only by the grace of God that you are who you are today, and that you help so many people. I mean, I'm just blown away by that. So tell me, how do you deal with this now? Now you're going into high school, you're getting older.
Yeah.
And when you are getting older, you're like, wait a minute, that's not right. Did you ever have that confrontation with your dad or even your mom and your stepdad?
I didn't until I was 17. I was a senior in high school, and I was tired of going back and forth to households. And so I told my dad, I want to stay with my mom. And he was angry. He was very, very upset. And I'm like, because I think he carried a lot of condemnation because he knew, things that had happened, and he never dealt with it. And so I did confront him years later about the abuse, and, it didn't go very well, but, I told him I was, with the advice of a counselor, but I had completely forgiven him, but anyway, there's just, unfortunately, he's almost 80 years old and he's still an atheist, but I am believing that he is going to come into the kingdom someday. But my mom, I did confront her about, why did she leave me and my sister with him when she knew that he was doing drugs and all of this? And she got upset about that and didn't really take responsibility for it. So it was that was when I was older and had my own kids. But it was, so how to cope with it as a teen, as I started socializing, and I became an alcoholic. So I became a binge drinking alcoholic, and that's, it helped me to all of the negative things that I thought about myself when I drank alcohol and was around people, as the life of the party and everything. But obviously, on the inside, I was kind of dying inside.
Yeah. So you had mentioned to me in the pre-interview about the self-injury had started when you were much younger. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. I was full of anger, and like I said, I had no one to talk to. I did not know what to do with it. So basically I just hated myself. So and also I was getting in trouble all the time. So I would get grounded and have to stay in my room. And I just started, banging my head against walls, pulling my hair, taking safety pins, and and pricking myself, cutting out like moles and freckles and stuff like that. I mean, just weird stuff. And then it progressed to finding a razor at some point where I used it and started cutting my legs. When a child hurts themselves, they normally stop, but I didn't stop. It's almost like I enjoyed the pain, because the physical pain, because it was easier for me to feel that than the emotional pain. It really was at the time, even at a young age. And it's hard for me to even talk about that because I have such compassion on the child that I was at the time, you know.
So, but Nicole, explain that to me, because that I know that there's a lot of people out there that do self-harm. Maybe there's a parent out there that could be listening right now. So did you got satisfaction out of that? You felt you were validated? It took your mind off? Like, what did it do for you?
Well, one of the things that it did, and I really believe this is the enemy that comes to steal, kill, and destroy, because of what Jesus did on the cross. Jesus paid for all sin and everything on the cross. All the anger and judgment and wrath was poured out on him. But I in the punishment that we deserved. So, but I felt like I needed to punish myself because I was a bad person, that I was a defective person. There was something wrong with me. So kind of harming myself was like, okay, I'm going to punish myself because I deserve punishment.
Okay, I get it.
And I think that's why a lot of kids end up doing it.
Right. So now you are self-harming. Did you do it all the way along, or did you do it, like sporadically?
It was sporadically, but then I switched to alcohol completely until my life fell apart later on. Then I went back to the self-injury. But once I found alcohol, I was like, okay, well, I'd rather do this.
It numbs it more than hurts it, right?
Yeah, exactly. But now, that wasn't good either.
Did you ever get into drugs?
No, and the reason that I didn't is because my dad was a drug addict, and I wanted nothing to do with drugs. But if I would have gotten into drugs, I mean, who knows what happened. Now, later on, there were some prescription drug stuff. Right. But as far as some of the drugs that were common then, I'm like, I want nothing to do with it.
Wow. All right. So now you are a teenager. You're getting ready to graduate high school, and you're going to go to college. So where are you at now that you're going to be getting out of your house? Where are you at with all this going on?
Okay. Well, I will say that, thank you, Jesus. He provided a father figure in my life in high school that was my track coach. I loved him so much, and he made me feel special. But he helped me to get good at sprinting and running, and I, ended up going to college on a scholarship, and I continued to keep in touch with him. And he was just, God used him tremendously in my life. But when I went to college, I was the first one in the family to go. I was so happy to be out of the home. I mean, I was so happy to be out of the home. But at the same time, it was difficult, again, trying to get to know new people and feeling safe. And that took some time. But I think it was a gift to be out of my home an hour and a half away.
I have a question about that, because, for instance, when we were kids, we knew what was going on in our home, because my home was very abusive, not my mom, but my dad. And when we would go to other people's homes, it'd be like, there's something different here. But it wasn't different enough for me to go, oh, that's how you're supposed to live. I thought the way we lived was the way it was supposed to be. Did you find that? And then when you actually went on your own, were you like, wow, I actually have control over how peaceful it is in here or not?
Oh, yeah. I remember actually, like, as a teenager with my close friends in high school, I didn't even know how to talk to their parents, because I didn't know how to talk to adults, because I didn't really have that communication, that open communication. And it was, I mean, I did see how there was such a difference in the homes. Now, some of them had broken homes too, but I could see that there was a difference in the family and things that happened, especially that the mom that said to me years ago, "You're beautiful." Her home was such a beautiful Christian home, and they were so close. And even when I married my husband down the road, I'm getting a little ahead, but his family was just normal. It was just, I started grieving what I had never had.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's so good. It's so true. So, okay, so now you're in college and you meet your husband.
Yes.
Right. All right. So now, are you drinking? What are you doing? Self-harming? Any of that?
So running is really good, and exercise is good for the chemicals in the brain. So I love doing that. But at the same time, I would travel to different track meets and hardly eat anything all day. And then the bus would bring us back to the campus, and I would start drinking and getting drunk and throwing up and having a hangover the next day. That was like the cycle. And my husband, when I met him, I mean, he was a foreign exchange student from France. So I'm thinking, well, France is wine country. He's drinking a lot, you know, but he didn't. And he was surprised when he saw how much I drank, and you know, especially when I'll just be real here. You want the details, right? When he saw me doing a beer bong at a party, he was like, do I really want to be with this girl? You know, cultured Frenchman. But anyway, but he expressed his concerns to me about it. And so I
Did you get defensive?
A little bit. I'm like, hey, you know, we're in college and you're the one not drinking. You're the one with the problems. But I really loved him. And so I started to calm down with that the best way that I could. And yeah.
Okay, so now you get married, right? Did you get married right out of college?
A couple of years later, I actually went over to Claude's school in France to be a foreign exchange student.
Okay.
And I was not 21 at the time. And so I took full advantage of it, because in France, you don't have to be 21 to drink. So my point is that everything revolved around some kind of escape. So, but I studied in France, and that was a really good experience. It was hard too, as well, but I got to see my husband's country, and Claude and I became very close, and he loved on me and just really treated me like I had never been treated in my life. But I did continue to drink. I made sure that I got drunk when he wasn't there.
Yeah, did you ever like look in the mirror and say, you're an alcoholic?
No, I didn't. I knew I was born again. And actually the thought that came to me is, what am I going to do in heaven if I can't drink? I mean, that's the thought that came to my head. Never crossed my mind during those times, or at least I blocked that thought out at that time. Now, fast forward, unless you want to ask me a question.
No. So now let's fast forward. You get married,
okay.
and
Yes.
and so everything is good. I mean, as far as pretty much surfacely, you know, is good. And then tell us what happened.
Well, yeah, and we had friends that we had dinner parties with, and we had some wine and that, but I was okay. I wasn't getting drunk and all of that at that point, at least not that I remember. But we ended up getting married and having 3 beautiful kids. But I will tell you, with each pregnancy, I was always afraid of how much did I drink. And actually, we're going to get into details, and I don't share this much. I might as well share this, because there was a point in between my second and third child that I wondered if I was pregnant. So I took a test and it said negative. And I knew that we were going over to France, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I can drink all that I want while I'm over there. Okay. And I did. So people would say, well, Nicole doesn't need water. She's got wine. You know, I was known that way, you know. But I came back from France and took a pregnancy test, and I was pregnant. And I ended up having a miscarriage about 4 weeks later. And I felt so much guilt about it. I felt like it was all my fault. And so as soon as that happened, the way that I dealt with this is I started drinking. I said, at least I can drink again. And I actually had a friend at the time who said to me, if you don't start dealing with this stuff, like your life is going to fall apart. And I just ignored it, you know, and just started drinking again because everything revolved around that.
Wow. Okay. So when did things start going dark? I mean, like really?
Okay. So I ended up, you know, having 3 children, and a year and a half after, my son was born, actually a year after my son was born, I had another miscarriage. And that also, I felt guilt about it. I felt like it was my fault, and that started a spiral. So at that point, I was full of anger, and just, it was starting to come out, and I just didn't know what to do with it. So I started drinking more and more. And by the way, there did come a point with that where I would open up the fridge and I would get an alcoholic beverage out. And I did say to myself, why do I need this? You know, there was that little point at that. And we were going to church at that time and everything. And I was going to Bible studies and that. So I started drinking again. And then when my daughter was the age that I was, you know, when I was sexually abused, that's when I started having flashbacks of sexual abuse.
So that's
when
daughter?
My oldest daughter.
Okay. So when you were viewing, now, did you happen to say one day, hey, you know, I'm the same age that, you know, the baby is, or, you know?
No, I didn't, but I just figured it out afterwards. I believe, well, I might have been, I actually could have been abused younger but what I remembered at that age. And I just started having flashbacks. And at that time I was thinking, because I was a mother, I'm thinking, you know, how could my father do that to me? You know, as I'm looking at my daughter, you know, it's just innocently, and it crushed me. And I started drinking again, you know, and just started to cover that up. And I got to a point where I invited my pastor to come over, and that's where I finally started opening up, because I felt like I was dying inside and I didn't know what to do with my life. And so I shared with him what I was doing with drinking, the sexual abuse. I didn't know what to do with it. And because I knew that his wife was a recovering alcoholic, and that was very public in front of the church. And I knew that I could trust him with that. And so she came over. She came over not long after that. And basically I talked to her, and she said, you know, I believe you're an alcoholic. And we just dumped everything out. And from that moment on, when I couldn't drink, it was hell on earth.
Wow. Okay. So explain the downward spiral.
Okay. So basically I was fear, anxiety, didn't know what to do with those emotions because I couldn't escape them, thinking, how am I going to never drink for the rest of my life? You know, I'm an alcoholic, you know, just all these labels. But then, so those voices in my head were telling me that I was a bad person. I was a bad mom, you know, all these things. My kids would be better off without me. You know, all these negative, all those core heart beliefs that came in as a child, and I couldn't take the voices anymore. So I took a butcher knife and started cutting my legs. And my husband saw, or he found out, I don't even remember what happened with that. And so my pastor and my husband decided, and my counselor, that I needed to go to the psych ward. And that was the first time that I had gone to the psych ward. And at that time, they diagnosed me with depression. And I just remember being in the psych ward and just, you know, all these thoughts come in of, you know, I'm an outcast, you know, the stereotype of what people view. People think you're crazy. They don't want to listen to you. So those, you know, those voices only confirmed what I was feeling about myself. And so I started, you know, I took a butcher knife one day because I could not handle those negative voices, and just started cutting my legs, and ended up in the psych ward.
So I remember one of your teachings, you talked about you get in the psych ward and they strip you of all your clothes.
Yep.
Oh my God. When you said that, I just like, I couldn't even imagine what something like that must be. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, it's very, and the one especially, well, later on, where I went to the psych ward, and then I went to a self-injury program. So when you get to the program, they strip you naked because they want to look at your body to mark every scar on a piece of paper, on a diagram, to make sure that you're not harming yourself in some way at the program. And so, but I want to share this too. I mean, it's humiliating. And then I think it was the third psych ward program I was in, and I was in there for 2 weeks. They wanted to transfer me to the self-injury program, which was an inpatient program for a month. It was right across the street from the ER because it was the psych hospital and the hospital. They would not allow me to walk over there. They had to call an ambulance and put me in the ambulance, hook me up, put the belt on and everything, and take me in an ambulance over to the program. And that was very humiliating as well. It was like,
now, meanwhile, all this is going on. Have they got you on medication?
They had me on antidepressants, and yes, I had gone to, in between psych wards and that, I went to a couple of psychiatrists, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, PTSD, anxiety disorder. I had panic attacks, borderline personality disorder. And, you know, I was an alcoholic and a self-injurer, and actually developed a binge eating disorder as well. From the medication that I took to sleep, I would eat. I gained, I can't tell you how much weight. I used to be very thin, and I didn't remember in the morning what I was eating. And so none of the meds were constantly being changed. And so it was antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, a couple of different ones, and, you know, sleeping meds, ADD meds, and sometimes anti-anxiety meds when I can convince the psychiatrist to give me them, and then I would abuse them. So I overdosed on them in a psych ward program at one point. So I was a mess.
Wow. Gosh. I mean, just this story just gets, this is intense. It really is. Yep. And I know that you get to speak a lot, you know, at different conferences and stuff, but man, our viewers are going to get the details of this, because yes, we don't always get to hear all the details of other people that might be right in the middle of their journey. And so right, this is so inspiring, because there is a light, right, that's yes, at the end of your tunnel. And so, yep, okay, so how many years is this that you're going in and out of psych wards? How many years is it? And what is happening at home with your kids and Claude?
Okay, it was about 6.5 years. And I'm telling you right now, if it would have lasted another year, I probably would not be here, because it was like constant torment and turmoil. Multiply my childhood by like 500. And so my husband is an amazing father, amazing husband. I am so grateful, because I want to tell people too that before my life completely fell apart, I was like the mother that wanted my kids to have a better life than I did. I mean, I played classical music. I took them to dance class. I did so much with them. I read to them books all the time. I mean, I was involved in their lives. And then when my life fell apart, the guilt that I felt about that. But my husband, has always been an amazing father, and he was a solid presence. And it was devastating for him to watch his wife completely fall apart and not be able to fix me. So the kids, we had to hire people to come in, babysitters and that. And they did not like that. I mean, they were traumatized, and there were times when, and it's so hard, but I want to give people hope, and I want to say that God heals families. But there were multiple times when I was at home after, doing a program and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden I would have an episode, and they would have to take me to the psych ward, and I'd be gone for who knows how long. And my kids, I couldn't say goodbye. It was like they didn't know what to do with it. And it was very hard on them. And I also felt tremendous guilt and shame, because I'm thinking, they should not have to deal with this. And can I tell you one thing that happened? When I was in one of my psych wards, my oldest daughter actually got an infection, a cellulitis that was like in her nose area, and she had to spend about 4 days in the hospital with antibiotics and that. So my husband took her. She was in the hospital across the street. They allowed us to go to a hotel for 2 weeks, but I had to do the program. So I walked over to the hospital where my daughter was, and I just remember the nurses, I said, well, I'm her mom. I'm Tiffany's mom. The way that they looked at me like, oh my goodness, she hasn't been here. She's not a good mom. It was just the guilt I felt over all of this was overwhelming.
I can imagine. Oh my God.
It didn't help my suicidal thinking. Let's just put it that way.
Let me ask you a question. What's going on with you at this time spiritually? Right.
I was actually reading the Bible. I was in the psych ward programs, and that I would, whenever I was allowed to go to my room by myself, I would read the word. I mean, I knew it was my only hope. I would share Jesus with people in the group, and I would hug my Bible in the psych ward, crying myself to sleep, wanting to be with my family, but not knowing how to be well, thinking that I would be sick for the rest of my life. But in a way, I felt like I had no hope, but if I had any hope, it was in the word, but I just didn't know what that would be, because I did not believe that. I thought God picked and chose who he healed, so I certainly didn't qualify. So, but I still continued to pray, and it just, when they would have chapel, I would go to chapel. And I will just say this, there was, it was optional to go to chapel in the psych ward, but there was one time when I went and they played Great Is Thy Faithfulness. And I was crying my eyes out, singing that song, not knowing what to do, in so much pain. And so now when I hear that song, I cry tears of joy because he is faithful no matter what.
Yeah. So you really did not know Jesus personally at that time.
I did not know the true nature of God. I thought God was mad at me. I thought he was disappointed when I relapsed. And so I deserved what I got. I deserved to punish myself. And so, by the way, I had started self-injuring again during this time, but with razor blades, and I got addicted to, like, I tried to hide it the best I could, especially because of the neighborhood I was in. But one time when I was cutting myself and watching the blood flow, I heard the voice of the Lord say to me, you don't have to do that anymore because my son shed his blood for you. And at that moment, I was like, I thought you were mad at me. Like I was shocked that he was loving me in my mess, but I still didn't understand that I was forgiven and loved and righteous and healed in my spirit.
You know, it's so crazy if you think about it. Here you are, this individual who, you know, you think God doesn't really care. Maybe he's even, you know, punishing you too because of all the bad things you've done. You don't have a mother that's supporting you. You don't have a father that's supporting everybody. It's just a mess. I mean, gosh, like that's what I don't understand. It's like, where do you go with that? You go to what you were just saying. You go to the self-harm. You go to the drugs. You go to the alcohol. You go to something. And I tell you, you know, Jesus gets such a bad rap, you know, when it comes to, because people go to the religious side of of the religious doctrine that people teach about Jesus.
Yeah.
And all along, he sat there just waiting for you to, you know, to get the truth in you, to know that you could trust him.
Exactly. And that's the thing. He wanted to show me, you don't need to run and hide from me. I am your answer. I will get you out of this. You don't have to wait until you get it all together, because in Christ, we are perfect and blameless and everything righteous. But I did not know that at the time. And so that's why this is a message that I will continue to preach, especially to recovery groups and people that are struggling, to let them know that in Christ, you know, God is not mad at you. He loves you. He will help you. He's the way. Healing belongs to you, because I didn't know that for so many years.
So now give us a description of how did you walk out of this?
After, you know, psych ward experiences, you know, lots of counseling, recovery groups, relapses, everything else, medication changes, diagnoses and everything, there came a point when I was invited to go to a Christian recovery group. And at first I met the woman at something called a dual diagnosis meeting. That means you have a mental illness and you have an addiction. So I loved labeling myself that I was a Christian bipolar alcoholic, you know, and I was proud of it. And I was like going to share that with everyone, you know. But guess what? God never viewed me as his bipolar Christian alcoholic. You know, I'm a healed and loved child of God. But she invited me to go to a Christian. She was my sponsor at the time. So somebody you're supposed to call and work the steps with. But she invited me to a Christian recovery program. And I finally ended up going. And I met a couple of leaders in there that were really, I could tell they had something that I wanted. And so what happened was I continued to go, but what they have told me is that I would always look down and I would never look people in the eye in the group, and that I didn't really say anything. And so, but there was a time that I just started emailing one of the leaders, and she actually was a psychiatric nurse. So, and I knew that I could trust her. And so, you know, we were corresponding, and I just told her, hey, I was labeled with all of these things, bipolar, you know, PTSD, everything. And you know, they're incurable, right? And I'll never forget, she wrote back, with God, all things are possible, and the enemy is trying to steal, kill, and destroy your life. And it was really, you know, I had a lot of people praying for me as well. I had a lot of people from my church that were loving me, even when I pushed them away. So I believe that they were preparing me for this moment as well. I mean, the power of prayer is amazing. And so the Holy Spirit just basically, I knew that was true, because I had tried everything else to be healed. I mean, I was the A+ psych student, A+, you know, I went to all the 90 meetings in 90 days. I did, I don't know how many 4 steps. And I'm like, I'm doing the programs the way the world is telling me to do. And yet I'm not free. So I knew, I'm like, this has to be true. And so it was time I got mentored, and the other woman had shared her testimony with me of how she was healed of actually environmental illness. And that when she shared that, I realized that I could be healed too. And so, you know, they started mentoring me in those truths. But guess what? That revelation moment that I had, it's been like 14 and a half years. I never, ever, ever have spoken those labels over my life since that moment. I've never called myself bipolar, PTSD, all these other things. That was it. My new label and identity became child of God.
That is awesome. And, you know, think about it. That does help you stay in the place of doom and gloom when people are constantly labeling
Yeah.
you. You couldn't get out and say, no, I'm not. I'm Nicole, child of God. You know, it's just you, and what people are saying, we believe. You know, it's like that. It's just easier to believe the lie than it is to believe the truth, because the world is so strong and you're hearing it. Unless the only way that you're not hearing it is when you're in the Word and you're hearing something else. You know, it's like I say this. I always say I gotta walk around like this with the Bible right here in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
When I know that I've taken on some kind of a lie that I know is not. I know it's not true, but I gotta get that thing out. You know, it's like that splinter that gets into your finger. You're like, no. So I'm gonna speak that word. So where are you now? Where are you?
Okay. So I want to say this too. It wasn't until, so I started renewing my mind and reading all kinds of scriptures on healing and authority, and just started using my authority in my life when symptoms and things would come back. But I knew I was healed. I mean, I knew it didn't matter what happened. So I went to my psychiatrist 6 months. By the way, I knew about, how long was it after? Maybe 2 to 3 months after I got that revelation, I knew that I wanted to go off all of my meds, and that was my story. But I knew I was healed. I wasn't going off of my meds to see if I was healed. In fact, I was still taking them, but I didn't care because I knew I was healed. And I went off of them, and it was 6 months later that I went to my wonderful Christian psychiatrist, and I told him, hey, you know, I'm healed. And he looked at me all funny, and he's like, you know, it can come back. And I said, no, it's not coming back. And so he asked me, do you have this symptom, this symptom, this symptom? No, no, no. So I went back a year later. So that was a year and a half later. And because I wanted him to document my healing. And so I went a year and a half later, and he asked me, okay, he was shocked. And he said, do you have this? Do you have, and I'm like, no, I'm healed. Thank you, Jesus. You know, 2 years later, I went back to him, and it turns out the day that I went to go see him was like his second to last day at the practice. And if I would not have gone in, I would not have his documented healing. But I said, hey, I'm healed. So he actually wrote, and he told me he believed God placed me in his life for a reason. And I know he was wonderful to me, but he documented my healing. And he said, and I have it memorized, he said, although, and he still believed, he told me, I never saw a Christian with bipolar disorder healed, and he did not think that I would be healed.
Yeah.
And so he said, he wrote, but I was blessed. He wrote, although bipolar disorder is a waxing and waning illness, neither of these seems an adequate explanation for the patient's essentially abrupt and non-symptoms that are well documented. It was something like that. So
Wow.
I have that documented that he wrote. And so basically after all of this, guess what? God started opening up the door almost right away for me to share my story. So that same group where I got free and I was looking with my head down all the time in the group, they asked me to give my testimony, and I would look, I mean, I could hold my head up high in boldness, because I was so happy to be free. And everyone knew, even people in my church that didn't know me, they're like, what happened to Nicole? She was on the prayer chain every week. We didn't know if she would make it. I mean, really, people had dreams of being at my funeral. And yeah, and they're like, what happened to you?
Oh my gosh. This is awesome. Thank you, Nicole. I can't even, this story, your life story is literally going to free millions of people, and they already have. I know that because I know you, and I know that you share your story anywhere you can. But I just want to thank you for sharing it on the journey, because this is where people are on a journey, and we know that they win. We know that they are triumphant. We know that they win. And here is an example of somebody that, you know, in the middle of it thought, there's no way out of this.
Yes, that's right.
Look what happened. So I am so blessed. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this has been amazing. And I'm just excited about what your future is too, because I really believe that right now, just for you, that it's just hit just a little bit of it. And what God's going to do for you is huge. So thank you so much, Nicole. And
thank you, Julieann.
As a friend.
I love you too. Thank you, Julieann. Anytime I can brag on Jesus, I'm going to say yes. But I love you, and I just thank you for being on this journey with me.
That is so great. I'm just like, I'm blown away, because I didn't really know a lot of your details. And now I do. And they were very grim. And, but Jesus. So
I just want to tell people, no one is beyond hope. Hope, healing is for you in Christ. You can continually renew your mind. You can get to that place and of peace and joy, and because of Jesus.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. And we have to end it here because we've run out of time. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Wow, what a testimony. And what I love the most about this testimony is that she really got down deep into the muck and the mire to really show you how good God is and how much He loves you and what He thinks about you, no matter what you've done. Thank you so much for joining me. And I know that your life is changing as a result of this show and as a result of bringing these people on that just want to see people set free. And remember to subscribe and share. The more you share, the more people we can see be healed. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.